To proceed, we're still here with Al-Ubudiyyah, slavery, or being a true slave of Allah, a book by Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, may Allah bestow mercy on him, on how to be a true slave of Allah or a true servant of Allah, how to establish worship in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed, and in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires of us. So last time we didn't really cover anything. We just talked about the title of the book, and we talked about Al-Ubudiyyah being your path to liberty. Slavery is slavery to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your only path to true liberty. But prior to this, we were talking about the iniquitous inconsistency, or the inconsistencies of the people who use Qadar, who use the different forms of the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deny their need to comply with the divine will, with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So basically, we talked about how they claim that everything is equal because everything is created by Allah and everything is decreed by Him. So since He decreed all things, then all things are ultimately equal because they are ultimately His will. But we said that there are things that He wills but dislikes, and things that He wills and likes. And what we need to do is we need to do what He likes, not what He dislikes. In any case, you will do what He wills, because in any case, you're not going to be able to transcend His authority, His control, His power. But that does not mean that that He holds equal those who do what He wills and likes, and those who do what He wills and dislikes. It is certainly a misguided concept, and it would be very senseless or very false. Any examination, any logical examination, will find it to be extremely illogical. However, it's not only logic that controls people's thinking, but people are also controlled by their whims, desires, emotions, inequities, weaknesses, and so on. And we did talk about Qadari and Jabri. Difference between the Qadari and Jabri. Qadari would sound like there are people who believe in Qadar too much. It's the opposite. It's the people who deny Qadar. They're called Qadari. It is an expression anyway, so you just use it as its terminology. Do you know how the driveways where you park and the parkways where you drive? So this is like that. So Qadari is the one who denies Qadar, and Jabri is the one who confirms Qadar, but both are the excessive ones in their belief regarding Qadar, because Qadaris are excessive in their denial, Jabris are excessive in their affirmation. How would you be excessive in your affirmation of Qadar? You would be excessive in your affirmation of Qadar, but okay, how do you be excessive in your affirmation of Qadar?
You say that you just don't have any free will.
Okay, yeah. When your affirmation of Allah's will makes you deny your own will, that He created you as a willful being, He made you a willful being. You have, to a certain extent, a free will. It is never free from His control. And that's the whole issue. The whole issue is that you need to balance not only the different textual proofs, but you need to balance the different realities. You do know that you do have some will. For realistic, regardless of the proofs, regardless of the textual proofs that address the human will as a human will. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Let him who pleases believe, and let him who pleases disbelieve. Who wills, who pleases. فَمَنْ شَاءَ. So there is mashi'a for the human being here. But Allah said, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. And you will not unless Allah so wills. And that means that is actually affirmation of the human will, but it is also affirmation of Allah's superseding, encompassing, dominant, prevalent will over the human will. In order for you to be able to stay in the middle and to be able to not disregard the textual proofs on both sides, it requires effort, and it requires a certain degree submission, because you may not be able to completely comprehend it. But in order for you to relieve yourself from this balancing act, and that's what many people tend to do. They tend to go to one extreme to relieve themselves from the balancing act. You either deny Allah's, like in Mu'tazila, they denied Qadar, they denied predestination, because how would we be predestined and then we would be liable for our mistakes? It's unfair, therefore let's just deny predestination. They could not comprehend it to be any other way. The Jabris, they looked at realities, they looked at how sort of controlled we are from the big, controlled even in coming to this life. We have not chosen to come here. So they looked at this end and they said that we don't have any free will. But they did not look at the other end, which is the fact that I'm going to move this from the left to the right. Inshallah, God willing, here it is. So they disregarded that. It's a universal reality. I'm doing it. I'm not quoting text here. I am actually doing it right now. So they disregarded this for that, and the others did the opposite. Ahl Sunnah are always the people of the middle path, which may make them sound contradictory sometimes. And if you're not a clever Sunni, you're going to look contradictory and you may look very dumb. Because if you're not knowledgeable and you're not smart, you're going to look, because the middle path is always difficult to adhere to. The middle path means what? Means that you're going to be flip-floppy, sort of, unless you're knowledgeable and you're smart and you can really defend your position and you can really stay on it. But someone can pull you to the left, someone can pull you to the right because you're in the middle. So you're going to look a bit contradictory if you're not knowledgeable. And you may even look dumb if you're not smart, which is, I guess it's logically sound, this argument. You would look dumb if you're not smart. The premise and the conclusion are very consequential here. Okay, so the idea here is that should not discourage you from adhering to the middle path, because the middle path is the right path. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that in the Quran. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. Thus we have made you a middle nation, or a nation of moderation, of a middle path, that you may be witnesses on an-nas, humanity, where the middle path with regard to Jesus, peace be upon him. He is not God or part of God, and he is not as the Jews ascribe to him. So we're middle path in many, many regards. But even within Islam, there is a middle path between extremes on both sides with regard to various beliefs and various practices. So Qadari is the one who denies Qadar, ironically. Jabri is the one who confirms it, but they both exaggerate in their denial and their affirmation. So Imam Taymiyyah here was talking about how some people are inconsistent, and those are the people who follow their whims and desires. They're sometimes Qadri and sometimes Jabri. So he says here, as some of the scholars said to them, when it comes to obeying Allah, you are Qadri. In other words, you use Qadar as an excuse not to obey Him. When it comes to sin, you are Jabri. You say that it was decreed and you cannot help it. So if you say to him, for instance, to make it a little clearer, if you say to him, why don't you pray? Or why do you abandon your prayers? He may say to you, what business do you have with this? Or it's my business. I'm free to do whatever I want. But then when you say to him, why are you addicted to wine? Or why are you sort of involved in this or that? He would tell you it's Allah's decree. So they also flip-flop between Qadar and Jabr as they desire. Because eventually, one who follows his whims will never be consistent. That is the most inconsistent person, is the one who follows his whims, because he will always go with what is beneficial for him. Okay, then we'll talk today about false claims of gnosis, which is page 38. Gnosis here is not the Gnostics that you know of, but it has to do with that to some extent. And I will read and I will explain less because I listened to myself and found myself to be not a very good teacher because I do branch off too much. And I decided to listen to myself because no one has given me feedback. It's such a hateful thing to do. Huh? I listened to parts of it. So you just branch off and you branch off, and then I keep on, it's just like not a good thing at all. Anyway, so I kept on telling myself, when are you gonna come back to the topic? Huh? Oh, last week that was the most exaggerated example on this, on branching off. We didn't even start to talk about anything. Okay. False claims of gnosis. So I'm just going to read and explain a little bit so that we know how to, read the books of the people of knowledge. Among the false claims of gnosis here means the ultimate knowledge, because that's what gnosis means in Latin, ultimate knowledge. Al-ma'rifa or al-haqiqa. Among them, there are those who claim to have the ultimate deep knowledge or gnosis, tahqiq and ma'rifa, and claim that the duty to obey Allah's commands and heed His prohibitions applies only to those who think that their deeds and attributes come from themselves. But the one who believes that his deeds are not his own because they are created by Allah and he's forced to do them, and that Allah is controlling all his movements as he controls everything else, thinks that he is no longer subject to the commands or prohibitions of Allah or to the promise of paradise or threat of hell. Because everything eventually is equal to them, because everything comes from Allah, and if everything comes from Allah from one source, then just submitting to this fact will absolve you of all guilt and will also clear you of all liability. You're not liable anymore. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to stop yourself from anything. And that's the ultimate, blasphemy and misguidance, because there is nothing that is worse than this. There is nothing that is more defiant of Allah and His commands than to believe that you're not subject to any commands or prohibitions. So gnosis here means the ultimate knowledge. And the ultimate knowledge, this is a philosophical issue. It's the philosophical issue, the Platonic division of, the world of appearances, the world of ideals, and all of the people are involved in the world of ideals except the true thinkers and philosophers who understand that the world of appearances, not the world of ideals, people are, stuck in the world of appearances. But the true philosophers, they claim, are the ones who know that the world of appearances is only a reflection of the world of ideals, the world of meanings. Well, to some extent, we do know that there is the inward and the outward, right? To some extent, Islam asks of you to correct your inward and outward. Islam asks of you to correct your beliefs and practices. Islam asks of you to correct your heart and tongue and body and your actions of all of them. And Islam recognizes that for every practice there is sort of like a foundation of belief that results in this practice or this behavior or this attitude of the human being. So Islam does not deny this, but the idea here is Islam asks of you to sort of be righteous both ways, and to not create a conflict between the ultimate realities or the world of ideals and the world of appearances. There is no conflict. They should be in harmony. And if they are in harmony inside you, that is when you achieve holism. That's when you're together. That's when you're not fractured. Or when you're not torn apart between the mind, the heart, and the body. Okay, so they say that whoever recognizes, the Gnostics of our time are the people who claim to a certain extent that, as long as you recognize the higher being, you do not really need to subscribe to a particular structured religion or organized religion, whatever they call them, organized, structured, hierarchical, they can call them whatever names. Eventually you become your own Lord, because yes, you recognize the ultimate authority and you recognize the higher being, but the higher being is not talking to you. And since you deny the messages and messengers, you become your own Lord, because you decide what is right and what is wrong. And when did human beings ever decide this impartially? It's just not Aristotle, which is the first figure in philosophy. He's the one who taught Alexander the Great that, being a Greek, he was actually Macedonian, but close enough, still Greek, that you can conquer the rest of the people because they are of lower ranking. They're not entitled to the same rights as the Greeks. That's Aristotle. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. So this, first figure in philosophy was this misguided. So human beings are not impartial, and they can't really be their own lords, because if they become, they will just spread evil all over the place. They do. Okay, so he goes on to say they say that whoever recognizes the will of Allah is no longer subject to the duties of Islam. They claim that Al-Khidr was free of such obligations because he recognized the will of Allah. And why do they think that Al-Khidr was clear of those obligations? Who's Al-Khidr? You know, the story in Surah Al-Kahf about Musa and the righteous man. This righteous man who is not named in Surah Al-Kahf is Al-Khidr. So what? So why do they say that he was not subject? Because Allah sent Musa to him to learn from him, and Musa was the messenger of the time, but Al-Khidr did things that would look wrong or evil, but in the reality they were not, such as killing the boy, sinking the ship, and erecting the wall. Okay, so all were, looked like, evil or at least unwarranted. Erecting the wall was unwarranted. So then Al-Khidr explained to Musa alayhi salam. But who sent Musa to Al-Khidr in the first place? Allah. So who is, telling Al-Khidr what to do? Allah. Allah said that we have taught him from our knowledge. Therefore, the correct position, as Ibn Hajar, may Allah have mercy on him, says is that Al-Khidr was a prophet. And the fact that Musa was the messenger of the time does not mean that there were no other prophets in other places, because before the Prophet ﷺ, everyone used to be sent to his own people. So Musa alayhi salam was sent to the Israelites. Jesus, peace be upon him, said, or at least was quoted in the Bible to have said, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So there is no conflict here between Musa being the messenger of the time and having other prophets in other places. Okay, so basically their claim is invalid because Al-Khidr was receiving this knowledge from Allah. He was not acting on his own, desires or his own sort of knowledge that is not acquired, that is not received from Allah. They differentiate between the common masses and the elite who have recognized the cosmic reality and have acknowledged that Allah is the creator of the deeds of his slaves, and that he is the one who is possessed of a will and is running the affairs of all beings. We do know he created the deeds of his slaves, because Allah created our deeds. And when I say that I'll bring this book from the right to the left, inshallah, now, and I do this, I did not create my action. It's Allah who created it. It's Allah who permitted it. But I certainly was, determined to do it. I was a willful agent in doing this. They believe that there is a difference between the one who merely knows this at an abstract level and the one who truly sees and recognizes it. So they divide the elite or knowledge into two stages. If you just comprehend that Allah, comprehend logically, rationally, mentally, comprehend that Allah is the creator of all things, you have not reached there yet. So don't think that you're not subject to the duties and commands or the prohibitions as of yet. We're so grateful that they said that, because otherwise all people would have not been subject to, or most people would have not been subject to the commands and the prohibitions. Then they say, so they do not believe that the one who merely knows and believes it should be freed from all obligations. That only applies to the one who truly recognizes it and no longer sees his deeds as being his own. No longer sees his deeds. Because you could mentally think that your deeds are not your own, but in reality, you still see yourself as an agent, as a capable agent. You still perceive yourself as a capable agent. Once you're not perceiving yourself as a capable agent in their misguided ideology, once you do not perceive yourself as a capable agent, like you perceive yourself as a straw in the wind that is completely powerless. Once you have reached that point, then you have reached certainty, al-yaqeen. And that is when you don't need to comply with the laws anymore. So they could use a lot of proofs, because usually when you are on one side, you will have plenty of proofs. But the problem is you will disregard the other proofs. So you will only take one side, or you'll only take one group of proofs, and you disregard the others. So they can talk from here until tomorrow about the powerlessness of human beings and the greatness and absoluteness of Allah's power and Allah's will and Allah's. After all, we were nothing, and we were brought from this nothingness into existence by Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they can use a lot, but eventually there would be some breaking point that of their logical series of arguments that many people would not recognize, many people would not pick up. So they would start from a very valid premise and lead you to another valid premise maybe, and another valid premise. But at one point, they move from a premise to a conclusion with an illogical argument, but most of the people would not recognize it. That is when your heart should protect you. Even if your mind does not recognize the trick, or your mind does not recognize the break in the logic, your heart should protect you. That is when your foundation, your ideological foundation should protect you, because you should always go back and say, but this is not what the Prophet did, this is not what the Sahaba did, none of them quit worshiping, none of them quit complying, none of them claimed to have reached that ranking, and if they did not, how come, those who are way beneath them could reach that position? So Allah gave you so many safeguards to protect you. Now, if you overlook or skip or ignore those safeguards and just follow that illogical argument to their end in conclusion, then it is because of your wickedness. Then you do deserve to be there, and you do deserve to be misguided, because it is your wickedness. Allah had given you so many safeguards, so many milestones, so many lights to tell you, well, that doesn't sound right. So they take the idea of being forced by divine will to do things as a reason they take the idea of being forced by divine will to do things as a reason not to follow the duties prescribed by Allah. This is a trap into which many of those who claim to have true knowledge and belief in Tawheed have fallen. Because they tell you, we have the true knowledge. We understand that everything comes from Allah. We understand that Allah is the most powerful, and we are powerless, we're nothing, and so on. And they lead you from there to pure misguidance.
Do they say that for themselves, or do they say that for everyone?
And now, as far as you do not need to comply anymore, no, that is for the elite only. And that's for the elite only. There are so many refutations of this. We can refute the very foundation of their argument, which is that you don't have will, by so many ayat in the Quran that prove that you do have some will by the very concept of accountability, which indicates that you do have will. How could you be accountable if you don't have any will? By a test like this is a litmus paper test that you do have some will. We can say, where is that claim from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions? We can talk about, the ends of that claim. The ends of that claim is complete evil on earth, because if people do not need to comply, then that just means absolute evil. That could be refuted also by saying, you could counter this claim by even saying, whoever said that you're elite? Doesn't Allah say, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنِ اتَّقَى? So do not ascribe purity to yourselves. Allah knows best who is pious or who are the pious. So فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ means do not ascribe purity, do not justify yourselves, do not praise yourselves, do not exalt yourselves, do not give credit to yourselves. Wait until you are given credit by Allah. So that very claim that, the elite, but who would say about himself that I am the elite and I do not need to comply anymore? Except one who's wicked, because it is haram in the first place. It is prohibited in the first place to classify yourself as elite. Then the next part here is about confused views of Qadar. That's in the middle of page 39. Confused views of Qadar. The reason for this is that they could not comprehend the fact that a slave may be instructed to do something when it has been decreed that he will do the opposite, which is a fact that the Mu'tazila and other Qadari groups failed to grasp as well. So both extremes or both extremist groups fail to grasp that very concept, that Allah may command you to do something when He actually decreed that you do the opposite. When He actually inscribed in the preserved tablet that you will do the opposite. So Allah commanded you to pray when it was inscribed in the preserved tablet that you will never pray. But He still commanded you to pray. But He gave you enough willpower to be accountable for not praying. And a teacher may, as far as proving the knowledge of Allah, the preceding knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a teacher may give his people an exam, his students an exam, and tells one of them, I know that you will never be able to make it. Right? But then he will not hold him accountable to this knowledge of his. He would still give him the answer sheet, and he will still give him his full time to answer, and then he collect the papers, and then that the student will fail. Because the teacher knows that this student has been delinquent, has been this or that, so he knows that he will fail. But he still did not hold him accountable to his knowledge, but he held him accountable to his action, to his actual performance in the test. So that is to say, that is to prove that there is no conflict between Allah's preceding knowledge and your having enough will to be accountable for it.
Now, the effort made by the student there, Allah knows he's going to fail, or the teacher knows he's going to fail. So, is there any credit there?
Is there any credit?
I understand, but I'm just saying, all that, the effort that he put forth, he did not make it all the way. He was delinquent in his studies, okay.
No, he still failed the test eventually. And Um, okay, so because both groups failed to grasp this concept, the Mu'tazila decided, the Mu'tazila are the people who give more authority to logic over text, or wahy, revealed text. They don't say that we give more authority to our logic over Allah's, or over Allah's, that they just over text, because they say that eventually, if the text does not appear or the apparent meaning, the apparent implication of the text is illogical, then we know for sure it is not intended by Allah. The apparent is not intended by Allah. So Ahl Sunnah do not disagree with the concept that Allah would not intend anything illogical. But they say that what looks illogical to you may not in fact be illogical. Because there is something that all people agree on to be illogical, and there is something that people would disagree over, whether it is illogical or not. So how do you deem your own capacity or your own judgment over the text? Like 1,000 years ago, if you told people that man can go to the moon, they would have called you insane. And it's so illogical and irrational, not just illogical or irrational, you would have been, put in some, they didn't have even psychiatric wards at the time. But yeah. So that sounded to them very illogical, because human beings do not understand the difference between truly impossible and impossible because of your limitations, because of your limitations of imagination, your limitations in capacity and power and so on. If you told them that people could Skype, across the continents and see each other and talk to each other and so on, they would have said the same. So anyway, so the Mu'tazila decided that the Mu'tazila are the people who give logic more authority. So the Mu'tazila said, well, since we can't really comprehend how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's will would be superseding, and there would be a Qadar and predestination, and then we would be held accountable, let's just deny that there is Qadar. And the Mu'tazila, in doing this, they needed to do away with like too many verses and a hadith, because it's just overwhelming, the amount of text that they needed to disregard to get to that conclusion. The other people, the other extremists on the other side, who said that Allah is, that it's all Allah's action, it's all Allah's will, and that we have no free will, we're just like a straw in the path of the wind, they did not need to deny that many proofs. They denied some, but they did not need to deny that many. And they would find more proofs on their side, a lot more proofs on their side than the Mu'tazila. But eventually, what they are leading the people to is complete evil. At least the Mu'tazila are not leading the people to that, because they say that we do have a free will. When you make a mistake, you're going to be held accountable for it. You're going to be punished for it. They go to an extreme also in that regard, because even if you make a mistake to them, out of ignorance, you're still accountable. Because the Mu'tazila, for them, there is something called the tahsin wa taqbih al-aqli, which is the ability of logic to deem things hasan, good, or qabih, ugly, bad. So because they give logic so much credit, they try to be consistent here and say, yes, logic can deem what is good as good and what is bad as bad, and you're accountable even before you receive any command. And you're accountable even if you're ignorant of the law, because your logic should have told you, which is true to some extent that your logic should have told you, but it's true to when your logic should have told you that you should treat your parents kindly. But how do you treat your parents kindly? And what is mistreatment of the parents? When it comes to the details, no, logic will not really, then your logic and my logic will come to a point where we disagree. Your logic and your parents' logic will always disagree. You should treat your wife nicely. What does that mean? Her logic and your logic will almost always disagree. So that is where you need that is why you need guidance. Because logic is not absolute. So the Mu'tazila, he says, the Mu'tazila recognized the commands and prohibitions prescribed by Allah, but they rejected the idea of Al-Qadar, Al-Qada wal-Qadar, the divine decree and foreordainment, which has to do with the general will of Allah and the idea that He is the creator of the deeds of His slaves. This group, which is the other group, on the opposite side, this group recognizes the idea of al-qada wal-qadar, but they think that the one who reaches the level of recognizing qadar is no longer subject to the commands and prohibitions of Allah. They could not, however, claim that this freedom from obligation applies to all and sundry. So this group, however, it is not all the Jabris. There are Jabris who believe that you are accountable. There are shades of Jabris. He's talking about the most deviant of Jabris. The most deviant of Jabris who say that you're not accountable anymore once you have recognized this gnosis, ultimate reality, ultimate truth, ma'rifah, true recognition that you as a human being is completely powerless. Those are the most deviant of Jabris. But there are Jabris, different shades of Jabris, that would say the same, but still hold you accountable, or almost say the same, but still hold you accountable. So they deny that man has any degree of free will, but they still say that man is accountable. This idea, which is the Jabri idea, or the extreme Jabri idea that you're not accountable, this idea is worse than the belief of the Mu'tazila, for sure. Because the Mu'tazila will deny Qadar, but at the end of the day, they will tell you, you need to do everything right. Even if you don't know it, you're still accountable. So think about what you're going to do, because you're going to be accountable whichever way. That will not take you, it's still a misguidance. It's still the wrong belief, because you are actually denying some of Allah's attributes. You're actually saying that things happen in His universe, in His dominion, without His permission, without His will, outside His power. So you're actually limiting Allah's power and Allah's knowledge. This idea is worse than the belief of the Mu'tazila, and none of the Salaf held such a belief. Some of the Salaf were Mu'tazila, because the word Salaf does not mean that they never did anything wrong. Because Salafism means what? It means to follow the path of the Salaf. Who are the Salaf? Righteous predecessors. Salaf means predecessors, the people who came before us. In Salaf, when it is used in terminology, means what? The first 3 generations. Some add the 4th, according to some hadith. ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. It was said 3 times. So 3 plus the generation of the Sahaba, which is the first, means 4 generations. But the common usage is the first 3 generations are Salaf, the righteous predecessors, which is Sahaba, Tabi'een, and Tabi'a Tabi'een. Sahaba, Tabi'een, and Tabi'a Tabi'een. First 3 generations. That does not mean that there was no deviation at all within the three generations. It just means that the dominant belief was authentic. It means that the first generation, there was no deviation in Aqeedah amongst the Sahaba. And there is a difference between deviation and mistakes. Because the Sahaba did disagree on some issues that pertain to Aqeedah, but they are not foundational. They are not of the foundations of Aqeedah. They are not matters of deviation, but matters of error. Such as what? They disagreed whether the Prophet ﷺ saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life or did not. That's a matter of Aqeedah. It's not a matter of fiqh. But the Salaf disagreed over it. Sahaba disagreed over it. But then after the Sahaba, deviation did take place. And some of the Tabi'een became Mu'tazila, and they were extremely righteous. Because you have to understand that some of those people were extremely righteous. They just got misguided in one concept. We attack the concept, but you don't attack the person if the person is known to have been extremely righteous. You still warn the people against his deviation. You attack the concept, you attack the deviation, but you recognize the righteousness of the person who deviated in this particular concept or this particular regard. So Amr ibn Ubayd, for instance, one of the Tabi'een, who was Mu'tazili, was an extremely righteous man, extremely ascetic, a great worshiper. But again, at one point he committed some sort of injustice to himself by not following the right methodology, and then made his own conclusions and was not sort of deterred by a lot of people around him that are saying to him, you're going off too far, you're taking the wrong path. Would listen to what the Sahaba said, listen to what the elders said, etc., etc. But it does not sort of negate all of his righteousness. Anyway, so the Mu'tazila, that concept of denying, denying Qadar in the sense, in which sense? In the sense of Allah creating our actions, in the sense of us having, in the sense of their claim that we have truly free will. But certainly if you deny the preceding knowledge of Allah, then that is kufr, that is disbelief. Because Qadar is 4 layers. The preceding knowledge of Allah is the foundation, the first one. Then what comes next is writing, kitaba, inscribing in the preserved tablet. And then what's next is what? Allah's will, mashi'a, that He wills it or not, and based on that, you can do it or not. And then after this comes what? Creation of your action, the very creation of your action. So to will it or permit it does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will just let you do it. Allah creates it. It's not just that He would let you do it. Therefore, when you say, وَمَنْ يُضِلِّ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ, you should not translate this as, and whomever He lets astray will not be guided. You should say, whoever He leads astray, not lets. Because when you say lets, you're actually mistranslating it. Because it says yudil, leads astray, misguides. That's what it says. So you're mistranslating. Why are you mistranslating it? Because you do not want to say that Allah yudil, that Allah would lead people astray. But that means that they do it on their own. Where do you get the power to go astray without Him? How can you act without His creation of your very action? The energy and substance. there is this relationship between energy and substance. Substance becomes energy, energy becomes substance, right? Which means what? That energy itself is a creature. Like substance is a creature. Like you can't create substance, like you cannot create substance, you cannot create energy. Anyway, the idea here is if you deny the knowledge, the preceding knowledge, you're kafir. If you deny the writing, you're kafir. Then you get to the third and the fourth levels, and people can start to have different degrees of misguidance without being kafirs. So the Mu'tazila denied that Allah creates your actions, denied that Allah's will is superseding. In other words, that they wanted to say, no, you have free will, because you're accountable. And if you're accountable, then you have free will. Yes, you still fall sick without your will. But when it comes to your voluntary actions, you have free will. They would say, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought you to this existence without consulting you. We agree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take your soul away without consulting you. We agree. But when it comes to your voluntary actions, you do have a free will. And they think it's completely free will, which is the point at which they got astray. Yes? Okay. Yes, so inshallah we reached the end of page 39. We'll continue next week inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.